This is my Des313 player experience project. I looked at against all odds in particular, and then specifically survival genre. In that experience in the survival genre, I did a lot of looking into different games, like Subnautica, Breath of the Wild in particular for their temperature system. And upon that research, I chose the mechanics I felt were best practice and put them into this game, which I then play tested so I could get feedback and make alterations as time goes on. You will see 2 runs and then the final ending, and I will talk about what I gathered from each run and the ending overall. So to start with, when making the game, I didn't have any context, and the player feedback was that I should add more context into why you have to survive in this pit for 3 days. Player feedback allowed me to make that experience, and also gave me the feedback to add in the ending, so the player wasn't just surviving for the sake of surviving, to give them the motivation and a definitive end to my game. I made an inventory, as you saw before, with drag and drop systems. I originally started it with just a hotbar, but player feedback once again felt I needed something a bit more complex for a game of this genre. I also added in enemies, which will follow you if they see you, as I felt most of my research showed me that I needed to add in these kind of enemies. However, I did at one point debate whether or not I needed them, due to the fact that some survival games don't have enemies, and later on I made both versions and play tested, and the ants got a lot of positive feedback. I also added in loot. The loot I added in was an apple, a lighter, a bottle, all so the player can manage the health, thirst and hunger, with health being added once your hunger or thirst bar is full. And the lighter prevents the cold mechanic you will see later on. The apple and the bottle contribute to 1 bar each. I had multiple items, but I felt it was too complicated for such a short game that the player would need more time and a longer experience in order to understand the priorities. Both the apple and the can allow ways to heal, because once the first bar is full and the hunger bar is full, or whichever one you choose, the player will gain health. I chose to do this over a medkit, say, as I felt like it cost more resources to then have full health, which made the player more stressed and having to manage all 3 bars a lot more if they could only use 2 items to fill 3 bars. I then later added the temperature bar, as I was unsure how to communicate to the player when they're in a cold environment that you will see coming up, and I decided to use a lighter as the source of getting rid of this problem. However, the player can only hold 1 lighter in 1 slot, causing them to decide how much of however many items they should keep going with. And for this section of the level, which I chose to make a canyon, requires numerous lighters to get through, because I wanted to 1, show the mechanic, and to 2, make the second stretch of the game more difficult, as I felt the ants were quite easy to avoid. This also puts the odds against the player, as they must manage all 3 resources, and temperature does deplete very quickly. I originally had it deplete a lot less, but then player feedback made it seem not deadly enough, so I upped it a lot more, and it got to the speed I wanted it to, as I felt like if it was too slow, it would take forever to kill you and not be a threat, but if it was too quick, you wouldn't have time to react. I did, however, make it a lot quicker than it perhaps should be, because I wanted the player to have to quickly react and use a resource, so that they were constantly thinking about their temperature in the back of their mind. On this section, I made it just a hilly canyon, because I felt it was important that the player had to manage the mechanics, and I also made it so that hill that you just fell down, you cannot climb back up, so the player is now hard stuck in this section, and if they don't have enough resources, then they must restart, because that is bad preparation. I wanted to have it so that the player had to prepare for a stretch like this, just to 1, drag out the gameplay a little bit more for them, and 2, make it a lot stressful when you're in this pit to know if you have the resources you need to get to the end. Which also creates the danger of if you get to the end and you don't have the resources, you will die before you get access to the ending in particular. This run was ultimately unsuccessful on my behalf because I ran out of temperature and I did not heal in time, allowing us to see the death ending, which just says that you died. In run 2, I wanted to show off particularly what happened more with bad resource management, because that is a key part of my player experience, which I feel I did well. Player feedback was a big part in doing all of this and making sure the resources were finally balanced. I did, however, want to show off a little side route I made so that later on, because player feedback made it feel like once you were trapped in that final stretch, that was it. So I added a little side track back where the player can hide from the ants before going into that section, but also where it's still at the danger of the cold. Just to make it so the game wasn't easy and wasn't too easy, and this wasn't a safe zone, unlike the start. The start includes a safe zone. So the player can sit here for a bit, but their temperature will drop, and they still have to keep moving. Because I only really wanted one safe zone in this game, just so the player could learn the mechanics, and learn the ant mechanics specifically, because that was the one coming up first. So I made a little loop here, with the rocks just, above, so that they can re-enter the ant space, where after they've taken that breather they've gotten the chance to, where they can go back, maybe look for some more loot, and then find more resources to eventually feel like they can go back. The problem the safe zone also permits is while it is safe from enemies, the longer you spend in there, the more resources you're gonna get. And if you have drained this area out of resources, the ant area or the canyon section, you will not have what you need to get through to this, ultimately making death particularly inevitable. As you will see in this run, I have some resources, but it ultimately just isn't enough because I didn't manage it well enough, which causes the downfall. Again, there is a safe zone at the very start of the game just for the tank, so the player can learn the mechanics. And the newspaper at the start of the game shows how the player can survive. I chose to do it for a newspaper because I originally had it be a cheesy manual, but player feedback felt like it didn't suit the kind of game because they felt it was too cheesy for what should be a realistic survival tense game. Player feedback also suggested that in my first iteration I had too much loot, and in the second one I had too little. So I struggled to balance that out to start with, but I feel like I have found a very good balance now. The day system, the game will also cycle through a day-night system, and you have to get to day 3. So the player has to survive for a certain amount of time so they can even unlock the ending. It tells you in the top left what day you're on, but I didn't want to have it so the player knew what hour they were on or how long they had left to give it that never-ending feeling of odds. The game has an ending for once they hit day 3 and they get to survive. The newspaper at the start tells you where roughly to go, but the player still has to find it so that they can escape. I didn't want to make it obvious to the player, as I felt like telling them where the ending was took away some of the odds that I'd stacked against them, because they knew where to go. So once you climb up this hill, you get hit with the game's ending, which was important for the experience. Thank you for watching.